Hi, I'm Madison and welcome back to my channel. Today I have 5 books that you need to read before the end of 2022. So these are 5 books that I have read this year that I think you absolutely need to read if you can before the end of this year, because they are some of my favorites that I have read, and so therefore I would like you to also have a chance to read them. So the very first book is one that I read at the very beginning of this year. It took me completely by surprise. I read it in 2 sittings, in 2 nights, binged through it, was so surprised, and it's still something that I don't hear a lot of people talking about. I have a couple of friends who've been picking it up recently, but it's still like not a book that I see enough hype for, and that is going to be The Words by Ashley Jade. I tabbed this book. I love the shit out of it. It does have a lot of content warnings in it and trigger warnings. It is not going to be for everyone, but I do think that if you give it a shot, this could become one of your favorite books of all time, and it will definitely stick with you. It does deal with toxic relationships, so do be aware of that before going into it, and it does have huge trigger warnings in it for drug abuse, alcohol addiction, drug addiction, overdosing, bullying, body dysmorphia, a lot of triggers now that I'm sitting here and talking about it. So just be aware of that beforehand and going into it. But this follows Phoenix and Lennon. Now, the very first part of this book, like I wouldn't say like the first quarter maybe, or first fifth of this book, takes place when Phoenix and Lennon are in high school together, and they meet and they start a relationship because Lennon ends up tutoring Phoenix in English, and Phoenix at that time, he's like the bad boy of their high school and he wants to be a musician and a rock star, and Lennon is actually a songwriter and her dad is actually quite a famous musician, and so the two of them end up forming a friendship during high school, except for the fact that everything goes awry when Phoenix ends up deeply betraying Lennon, and then we flash forward, I think, like 5 years. In this 5-year time span, Lennon is just living her life as she is, and Phoenix is actually a like national superstar. Like, he is a rock star to the max. But Phoenix has kind of gone off the deep end, and his management is like, we need to get Phoenix in gear. Like, someone needs to be babysitting him, basically. And they don't know who to do, because every single time they hire someone, Phoenix manages to get rid of them in one way or another. He either sleeps with them or he does something else. And so they're like, what can we do? And they end up hearing about Lennon, and they know that Lennon absolutely hates Phoenix. And like, perfect. She hates him. She would do this job. Let's pay her for it. And they offer her an exorbitant amount of money. And so she agrees to basically be his babysitter. And so it's them rekindling their romance when she ends up going on tour with them in America. It is such a deeply emotional story. There are so many layers to this. They do have a toxic relationship for a lot of this story, but it is also a very beautiful romance within them as well. And it is something that, you know, you just have to read to really experience. And I adored it with my whole ass. It was absolutely phenomenal, but just do know about all the trigger warnings beforehand. But give this one a shot. Then I have another one of my favorites from this year, and that is Baby and the Late Night Howlers by Catherine Moon. If you have never read an Omegaverse, this is your sign to finally try one. This is my first ever Omegaverse. It is the perfect place to start if you have never read Omegaverse. This is set in Catherine Moon's Sweetverse. This is her version of like an Omegaverse world. And so it's for this baby, and she thought that she was a beta until she's in her 20s and she ends up presenting as an Omega. And she's like, oh my God, and Omegas are very revered. They're very much like prizes, basically. There's very few Omegas, and they're kind of what every pack wants is an Omega. You know, when she ends up finding out she is an Omega on that exact same night at a bar, she ends up meeting this really cute beta guy and really connects with him and is kind of like obsessed with him. And she's finding out that he is part of a pack called the Late Night Howlers MC. They're part of a motorcycle club, and this motorcycle club doesn't have an Omega, and they've kind of given up on the fact that they would ever find one. They just don't think that they ever will. They've been really hurt in the past from trying to find one, and so they just aren't very trusting. And then you have Baby, who comes in and wants to be with them, and they're very worried because they're not like as well known as other packs. Other packs can offer millions and millions of dollars and really high class like mansions and beautiful estates, and they're a motorcycle club. That's not what they have, and they don't feel like they're worthy of Baby, but Baby absolutely loves them. And so it is their romance. It is Omegaverse. It is like her, I think it's like, how many guys are in her pack? I think it's like 6 dudes. I think maybe, I don't know. I don't remember how many exactly it was, but This was so much fun. I absolutely adored the crap out of it. This is what introduced me to Omegaverse, like I said, and ever since I read this, I have just been reading more and more Omegaverse. It has become one of my favorite subgenres that I have ever read, and I'm such a huge fan of it, so I definitely highly recommend this. It is also really fun. It is more smut than plot, just do know that before going into it, and yeah. Obviously I couldn't do this video without mentioning Gilded by Raven Kennedy. If you have not yet started the Plated Prisoner series, this is your chance to, especially because the final book in this series does come out in, I think, is it June of next year? It comes out very early of next year. So in the first half of 2023, the final book in this series will come out. It is a 5-book series. I can't tell you too much about it because of the fact that the plot of this series does change with each and every single book. It is very much, in my opinion, like the Throne of Glass series. I feel like Throne of Glass, book 1 is one thing, book 2 is another thing. Then you get to book 3 and it's like everything is completely changed. And you know, how the series is at the end is nowhere where it was at the start. And this is very much similar to that. So I can't get into too much detail because I don't want to spoil anything, but this is a King Midas reimagining. You're following Oren, and she is basically the gold-plated prisoner. So King Midas gold touched her, and she is a golden human. Her story of, you know, being under him and getting captured by an enemy kingdom and where things go from there is all I'm gonna say. There is Fae in this world. They're very much Fae, like the Unseelie Fae, and it's very unique the way that the magic does work in this world. It's definitely like not high fantasy magic. The magic is fleshed out as the series goes on, and you also get more and more POVs as the series goes on as well, which is very unique. It is an enemies to lovers romance. It is a slow burn. There is no steam, there's no spice, there's no sexy times until book 3. But do please know that book 1 in this series does have an on-page rape scene, not of our main character, but of someone else while she is in the room. So that is a trigger warning for everyone, FYI. But this is one of my favorite series of all times. This completely took me by surprise. If you like dark fantasy romances, please read this. It was absolutely phenomenal. I would give my whole ass to be able to reread this for the very first time because it was just utterly phenomenal and I adored the shit out of it. In that same vein, if you've been watching my channel at all recently, you will know that the next series I'm going to recommend is The Cat and Mouse Duet by H.D. Carlton. I just read this back in October and I absolutely adored it. I have 100% made it my entire personality. I will never forget this book anytime soon. This is a series that will always stick with me. There are so many scenes, so many things that are just like consistently running through my head when it does come through this series, and I adore the shit out of it. So this is another dark romance series. It does start off with a prequel novella, and I do recommend that you read the prequel novella first. That prequel novella is called Satan's Affair. Put a little photo of it up here. So do read this first. But what the duet is about is it's a dark stalker romance at its very basis. Addie is an author. She has just moved back to her hometown and she's actually living in her grandmother's Gothic mansion that was left as like part of her inheritance. And she's living her life there. And then you have Jade. And Jade is a hacker. He actually owns like this gigantic like hacker organization where they track down human trafficking rings in the dark web. And so he's doing that, but at the same time, he ends up meeting Addie one day and becomes absolutely infatuated and obsessed with her and ends up stalking her. So he stalks her to the extent that he, you know, hacks into her security system. He breaks into her house. He leaves her gift places. He texts her from an unknown number. He threatens to kill anyone who touches her and then does kill people who touch her and leaves their severed hands on her doorstep as a gift. You know, regular stalker things. And so it is actually their romance. It is her romance with him as her stalker and kind of how they grow from that. It gets a lot darker, surprisingly enough. It gets a lot darker from there with the whole human trafficking ring and that as a plot as well. So do be aware that, you know, this book does have dub-con in it, it has non-con, it has knife play and gunplay. Book 2 in this does have on-page rape, on-page sexual assault. It has gaslighting, it has emotional abuse, mental abuse, a lot of manipulation does go on in the second book, especially to do with the human trafficking subplot. So do be aware of that. That is where this romance book gets really dark, in my opinion, is because of that. But the actual romance itself is actually super beautiful. It is an absolutely gorgeous story. I love Jade and Addie together. They are my entire life. They are such a ride or die couple, and the way that they grow throughout the series as well is really unique. And I really thought that the way that everything was handled in the second half of this duet was phenomenal. I've never read anything like it. I thought that H.D. Carlton did such a phenomenal job really handling everything, and I can't say too much more without spoiling stuff, but it's amazing. I do say if you did like the Hades Quartet by Tate James, you will definitely really love this series because they have very similar feels to them. And I also just want to give a shout out to one of my favorite characters of all time that I've now met through this series, and that is Sibby. Sibby is unhinged as fuck. She is unhinged. So if you're okay with murder and flat out murdering and graphic murder and things like that, you will adore this series. It is so great and I highly recommend it. And then the last one I have to recommend is actually not a book, technically, it's a manhwa. So this is the Remarried Empress. This just came out on November 22nd, I believe. It is published by Eyes Press. They are a brand new imprint that is publishing Korean comics in physical form. And so these are actually in full color. I will just show you here. This is kind of what they look like on the inside for anyone who is wondering. And these are actually really great for anyone who is a beginner to kind of the graphic novel, manga, manhwa, webcomic space, because these are actually the same kind of format as a regular book. So the spine is on the left side of the book for both of these. So you do open it just like a regular book, and you do read it like from left to right like you do a normal book. So you can read this as you would anything else, so it's not confusing in that sense, which I think is also super helpful. But what the Remarried Empress is about is that you're following Empress Neva, and she has been raised and she was a child to basically be the Empress, to marry her best friend, and who was going to eventually become the Emperor. And they get married, she becomes the Empress, he's the Emperor. They are like this golden couple. They are so amazing. They've done these amazing things for their like empire, except for the fact that one day the Emperor comes home having found this woman in a field that he has become infatuated with, and he decides to make this woman his concubine. And the Empress is like, oh my god, like no, like you can't, like, first off, this like is against everything we have ever done. You're not supposed to, like, rude. This man has been rude. They were supposed to be in love and he's just basically tossed the Empress aside, and it is absolutely awful everything that's going on with her. And the way this book starts off, the prologue, is the Emperor asking for a divorce from the Empress, which is extremely unheard of because he wants to marry his concubine. And the Empress ends up agreeing. She's like, okay, I will divorce you, but at the same time that I'm divorcing you, I would like to petition to be remarried to this other man. And everyone's like, what? The Empress is getting remarried? Unheard of. Unheard of. It is nuts. This is absolutely phenomenal. So this story is about the Empress kind of initially when she finds out that the Emperor has a concubine and how she deals with that and all the inner court politics, to her slowly falling in love with this other man who is, you know, sees her for what she's worth, and her finding her own identity outside of just being an empress, because that's all she thought she could ever be from a young age, and kind of coming into her own and being this absolutely amazing woman and kind of navigating all the court politics as they get even more and more brutal, especially as the concubine starts to do her own things too. Absolutely amazing. One of the best things you will ever read in your entire life. Out of a lot of the ones that I've read this year, I think this one is also very universal, because I feel that there are some of these that I do recommend from time to time that are a little more niche, you know, on what the subject matter is, as someone who isn't really familiar with manga or manhwas. But I feel like if you are definitely a beginner, this would be a really, really great option for you. So please do check this out. Plus it is just absolutely gorgeous as well. So yeah. And so yeah, those are my top 5 books I think you should read before the end of the year. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please slap it down below. If you want to see more of me, please go to my channel, and don't forget to check me out over on Instagram and TikTok. And until next time, thanks so much everyone. Bye bye.